Welcome to the first episode of the Word Nerd podcast. This episode covers a topic which should be of great value to you guys. It is how do you get your audience to engage more with the stories you tell them? How do you make sure that they're eagerly waiting to hear what happens next in your story? And the idea for this podcast, this episode, comes from an interview I was listening to on Spotify with Matthew Dix, who's widely considered to be the best storyteller in the world. But before I get into what he told us, let me give you an example. So here's a story that I would like to share with you, and then I'll share you another version of the same story, and you tell me which of the two stories was more engaging to you. At that time, my wife and I were the two unluckiest people in the world because after pregnancy, it turned out that mosquitoes loved us. One night, we were in bed and were getting bombarded by kamikaze mosquitoes who wanted to bite us, even if it meant dying on our arms. After hours of tossing and turning, I went to sleep in another room, thinking I'd draw those mosquitoes away from my wife. The next morning, though, she stormed into my room and was very angry because I had abandoned her to fight the mosquitoes alone and for not caring about our unborn child. This is version 1 of that story. This is the version that I wrote prior to listening to Matthew Dix's interview. And now for the second version, the one I wrote after listening to Matthew Dix's interview. At that time, we felt like the luckiest people on earth. My wife and I were expecting our first baby, but our silver cloud had a terrible, dark lining. Pregnancy changes body chemistry, so her pregnancy made us the target of kamikaze mosquitoes. So one night, to save her from mosquitoes, I went to sleep in another room, but my good intentions would have dire consequences for our marriage. She woke up the next morning shouting about my selfishness and for not caring about our unborn child. Now, these are two versions. You tell me if you like the first version more or the second version more. And while you guys are doing that in the comments, let me tell you the difference between the two versions. The first version of the story sounds like a series of events that happened. My wife and I became pregnant. We started getting bombarded by mosquitoes. I went to sleep in another room. And finally, my wife woke me up the next morning really angry with me. So it's just a series of events. And the second version, on the other hand, is more like this, that we became pregnant, we felt lucky, but because of the pregnancy, body chemistry changed. We felt unlucky because now we're getting bitten by mosquitoes. To solve that, I went to a different room, but that hurt my marriage because the next morning when my wife came into the room and yelled at me and called me uncaring for our child. Now, the first version, where things happen in a sequence, is called the and then version, where you say, first something happened, and then something else happened, and then some third thing happened, and then finally the story ended. The second version is called the but then version, where things happen, but there are zigs and zags in the story. We felt lucky, but body chemistry changed and we felt unlucky. I went to the room to do something nice, but my wife it had dire consequences on my marriage. And then my wife yelled at me the next morning. So there's a lot of variation of emotion in the second story versus the first story. And that is called the but then version. And most good storytellers tend to focus on creating but then stories. And Matthew Dix covers it really beautifully in that podcast called The Knowledge Project. And it is really, really insightful that just this minor change in how you interpret your story, how you present the story, can have such a big impact on how much people engage with it and how much they want to hear more. So every time there's a but in the story, the listener will be like, what next? And then you go tell them what happened next. And then you say, but. And then you're like, hey, what happened? Tell me more. But if it's just a series of events, and mishaps and things that keep happening, the story does not catch the audience as much. It does not keep them engaged and does not make them want to hear what happened next. That variation in the but and that zigzag that you have, the veering of the story, that's what makes the story engaging. And when you have a story to tell for anything, or for a product you built or something like that, you should be thinking about introducing those directional changes in the story so that the audience can follow along and they get invested in the story because they're following the story according to the pace you're setting for them. If you're going linear, they'll know right away what's going to happen next, and that's the end of the engagement with you. But a but then story keeps them with you. They have to follow you to know what's going to happen next, and that's what makes the story interesting. Hope this first episode of the Word Nerd podcast, the one which covers and then stories versus the but then stories, made sense. If you liked it, please share it, please listen to it, Tell your friends about it and subscribe. Thanks.